uno. Hey, au lao halau ai ana e mola lei kala ala panoa ki kula oku mano mano. Kuni hika no hoa mau na lahi lahi o maha kui ka wai o lua lua lei. Le ana nu anu I ka makala I pauku ia me ka ahihi. I ho hi no I wau na uno hoi o ko uku le ana pano ia he ke haole. He lulu lima te aloha. E au ki kilo hana ke konana ka maali e huli ana o kohala I maui nei na ana I ka makani helau ava o ai pi o ai manu. He lua kona puua peli ai o puua ava o puua no hulu o pili no me kalahi Keola. I ke ka moku nui la o Hawaii. Ke ka au nei o Hawaii luna mehelu pea. Ka lele o ni ka po o kaina. Na pele kula ka mahale o haaku ke le kula. Nui ta ua lai o ikua ka malama. Hei ke haole. He lulu lima te aloha. Hei ke Hawaii. He honi no te aloha 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 aloha.
Aloha, everyone. Please say mahalo to Aaron Sala. We're very honored that Aaron is the new chair of the Hawaii Tourism Authority. And so it's an honor and privilege to be here with him today. And it's an honor and privilege to be here with you, Kiersten, and all of you. And so I'd like to just share two stories and maybe a few facts, and Aaron and I will work together on this. The first story is, I remember one day getting called by an enthusiastic representative from Hawaii Island who has a lot of ideas all the time. And she goes, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And then one day she called me, can you come? And so I came to her office, and then I met Kiersten. And we sat and we talked and we talked and we talked about ideas, and we talked about the importance of our people, place, and culture. We talked about tourism. We talked about how to share that. And this conference was dreamed up in Representative Cindy Evans' office. And Kiersten was there, and Randy Tanaka. And we talked about a dream of getting everyone together, all of you who care for this place, who want to share the important stories because they come from our kupuna, they come from the past. And so we need that to guide us into the future. And we talked about how maybe if we start small as we go forward, maybe 10 years from now, this will be a premier international conference where people are coming together, learning the best practices from the people of Hawaii. And so I want to thank the two of you for working so hard on this dream. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you. I also see a great friend and a great Hawaiian man, Senator Gil Kahele. Is Senator Kahele from Hilo in the room? Oh, he went right downstairs. Oh, okay. When he comes in, we all stand up, okay? But he's been a great supporter and a great friend. Maybe on the more formal side, and this is just the formal side to get this part over, I think to talk about when we look at visitor industry or tourism or hospitality, I think there's three different levels. And the first level is the easy level. I can share with you all the numbers, the jobs that come out of this. So I could tell you that for every 49 people that get off an airplane, that supports one job in Hawaii. I could tell you that it's $14.3 billion a year. Every day, people spend $41 million of their hard-earned money in Hawaii. 20 on Oahu, 11 on Maui, 5 on Hawaii Island, and 4 on Kauai every single day. There's 44,000 people on Oahu on any given day. 94 on Oahu, 44 on Maui, 31 on Hawaii Island, and 24 on Kauai. It supports 170,000 jobs in Hawaii. But I think the higher bar, the next level, is that when you look at it, we're 2,200 miles away from the nearest land. We have about 1.4 million people. Yet we have over 11.2 million air seats, 975 flights a week from over 50 cities around the world by 21 different carriers. So because we have visitors, we, all of us, have access to the world. And so it works together, that we have access to the world and the world has access to us. And because we have access, we can share. But the higher bar is travel, tourism, is not about money. It's not about airlift. It's not about statistics and data and how many people land and come here. It's the quality of the experience. It's the quality of the stories. And it's about the relationships that are built. When people come to visit each other and get to know each other, they become friends. You taste each other's food. You listen to each other's music. You watch their dance. You learn about their history. You learn about their people, place, and culture. And pretty soon, the world doesn't pay attention to what the politicians are saying about countries or what the news media are saying about countries or people. They say, no, those are my friends. Really, tourism is about making peace. And it goes back to Auntie Pilahipaki, who said, as the world searches for peace, the world will turn to Hawaii because Hawaii has the key, and that key is aloha. So in our hearts, the higher bar is this whole thing we call the travel industry, where guests come and visit us and learn about our people, place, and culture. It's about creating friendships and about building peace. And we want to share one story, a historical story of when we got to know each other, Aaron and myself. We found out that our teachers were best friends. And so we both had different teachers. And so we're going to share a little story about our teachers because they played an important role in the history of the state of Hawaii. And so thankfully, Aaron can play music. I just learned the other side. And as I was a young man, I got to meet this gentleman as I would walk into the lieutenant governor's office. And sometimes when the lieutenant governor walked in every day, he was kind of so you know who lieutenant governor that was. But he would give everybody a hug, everybody. And he just started hugging me every day, going up there when I would go see the lieutenant governor. And everybody that walked in, he would greet them with aloha. And so soon, that gentleman ended up, I had the privilege of having him work with me in my office as a senator. And then he worked with me when I went to PBS Hawaii. And he worked with me when I went to the Department of Human Resources and did that job as a director. And every employee that came in, he would hug them and give them aloha. And his name is Uncle Keola Beamer. He named my three children Olokoa, Makana, Onalani, and Kaliko Lehua. He gave them all their Hawaiian names. But one day he told me about the story when he was young, and he was with his favorite cousin, Uncle Mahi, and his sister Nona, and they wanted to travel to North America, to the continent, to share our history, our people, our place, and our culture. So they went to this great organization at the time, HVB, and they said, we can have money. No. Okay, what are we going to do? We just go anyway. So they saved up their money, they got on the plane, went to LA, and said, what are we going to do? They bought a hearse, an old used hearse, and they named it Begonia, and that's where they put their base in the hearse, and they started traveling all over LA and slowly started traveling around the country, sharing their culture with people on the continent. They'd run out of money in one town, go to that town, play some more music, get enough money for gas, drive to the next town. They ended up in New York City. And in New York City, they had a long stint at this very famous room, the Hawaiian Room, at the Lexington Hotel. And Uncle Keola was the MC, and he went on to college, to Columbia University to get his degree. And I'll let Aaron tell the story of Uncle Mahi and how they worked together. But I remember at his funeral, there were so many people there. And the people who came were friends he made all over the United States and all over the world. And they kept coming back to Hawaii time and time again because of that first interaction and experience with Uncle Keola. And what was Uncle Keola doing? He was sharing the stories and the gifts that his kupuna gave him, telling them about our history and culture through music and dance. And it touched people's hearts. And it still touches people's hearts today. So Uncle Keola will never, ever be forgotten. And there'll be new Uncle Keolas born, and we'll share our stories of our people, place, and culture. So Aaron, why don't you take it away with Uncle Mahi and the music and your side of the story.
They had to get a hearse because there wasn't enough room in any rent-a-car to carry all the costumes and the bass. I first met Uncle Mahi, one of my classmates is here, Monty McCumber. When we were juniors and seniors in high school, we would drive down to Andrews when Uncle Mahi was at Andrews. But I first met Uncle Mahi at Bayview. When he was at Bayview, we were visiting. At the time, I was living in Samoa. My father is pure Samoan. Forgive me. And so we lived in Samoa for a time, and we had come home to visit my grandmother in Kailua and went to Bayview for dinner. Uncle Mahi came to the table, ordered the kids, there are 3 of us, ordered us all Shirley Temples, and made sure I knew how to eat the onions and salt at the table. I didn't realize at that point how important Uncle Mahi would be to my life. And so when we were juniors and seniors up at Kamehameha, we would go down to Andrews to listen to Uncle Mahi play and Van Diamond sing, and Robert Casimiro would come in, and Loyal was there once. I mean, just, the who's who of Hawaiian music at the time would go to Andrews. Well, one night for Snowbird Bento's 18th birthday, we had made her a cake, and imagine that, high school kids, just finished high school and going to spend time at a piano bar. And so we took our cake down to Uncle Mahi at Andrews, and Uncle Mahi called me to the piano. And he played something on the piano, and he said, can you do this? And so I started playing, and he stood up and he danced Snowbird a song for her 18th birthday. That's not the song I'm going to sing. But that night sparked even deeper mentorship between Uncle Mahi and myself. We named our son Mahi Ai after Uncle Mahi. And so I started to go out to visit him, out at Kavela, and then out at Punalu'u, now out at Kailua. And he taught me this song that he wrote when he was 17. He went on a boat with his uncle, Auntie Marmianette's father, Mahinulani Magoon. And he wrote this song about that day. And it's apropos of how the Beamers write these movies in their minds. And so the song goes like this. So they're getting ready. This is how Uncle Mahi tells the story. They're getting ready to go on the boat. It's cold in the morning. Eia mākou iluna o ka moku o leile hua ke kuini o ke kai. Mena kini a me ka haoli me ole I ke ala hele. So the boat's name is Leile Hua. Everybody's getting on board. Eia mākou iluna o ka moku o leile hua ke kuini o ke kai. Mena kini a me ka haoli me ole I ke ala hele. Nothing's going to stand in the way. Everybody's getting seasick because the waves were so high. Nui na alea o ka moana, huka e hukai, pulu I ka ili. Pohai na manuelele o ke aupuni, haha I hea ka holo ana o ka ia. So the birds would gather around the ocean where the fish are. Then Mahinulani would pick a spot where they would all drop their lines. Lu na lai na kalawai'a, na lai na huila, me lai na ken ken. So he didn't know how to translate the wheel line, and he didn't know how to translate the ken ken line. So he just said lai na huila and lai na ken ken. Nui na a, lu na lai na kalawai'a, na lai na huila, me lai na ken ken. Kani ka pele lohi ka ena kini. Pa'akaia he mahi mahi nui. So they caught mahi. Now time to go down into the galley to cook the fish. Ilalo mākou I kalumi kuke, ho mākau kau ka mea ono I ka puu ke moni, inua ke nā ai a mana, ua lava e nā hoa aloha. So everybody ate to their fill because the mahi was large enough. So, Mahinulani was a big brooding man. Tu mai o Mahinulani, he ka pena o ka moku, kona hewa he leo nui, e nona he puva I olu. So, Uncle Mahi says of this man that he was so, big, brooding man. He was alpha male, boss of the house. But Auntie would always, when he would scold them, Auntie would always remind them, Uncle has a really big heart. Puana ka holo o ka moku, ua lava mākou I tā lea, pili ka ua po paana laina, o leile hua ke kuini o ke kai. So the field trip is done, time to bring the boat back to dock. Puana ka holo o ka moku, o leile hua ke kuini o ke kai. Pili ka ua po paana laina, o leile hua ke kuini o ke kai. Thank you. Uncle Mahi. Incidentally, I started this morning with Onauna. I started with Onauna, and in my head, I immediately started to think of Uncle Mahi, and so stopped Onauna. So I apologize to all the purists who say that you have to finish what you start. Kalamai. But that Halawai Anai was written by Uncle Mahi's great-grandmother, Helen Deshay Beamer's mother, Isabella Haleala Kaili Deshay, Miller Deshay. And many afternoon I spent with Uncle Mahi to learn that mele and do it correctly. And I thought it appropriate for me to open with Halawe Anai to all of you this morning. So aloha. Oh, thank you. So I just want to do one more mele. John Urey is an academic on tourism. He's a tourism researcher. And he says that in tourism, the visitor and the local come together and conspire to create a version of authenticity. And in Hawaii, authenticity is a really difficult thing. Every time we talk about authenticity in board meetings and meetings that we have at HTA, I get goosebumps. It's a really difficult term for me to a really difficult notion for me to come to terms with. What does it mean in Hawaii? Well, heritage tourism is about people. And I've listened to Mike tell this story about Pilahipaki and aloha being the key to peace since I've come to the board in 2011. And the more I'm with him, the more I understand why it's become such an important idea, an important reality. Heritage is about people and how people relate to each other. And we have this notion of aloha. Aloha is hello and goodbye and love and happiness and sorrow, and aloha is all these things. And I really think that Kavena, when she was putting together the dictionary, aloha was one of these words that had no translation, and so she threw the kitchen sink into the definition. And it's really the first translation, the first definition of aloha that I think is most appropriate. That definition, that translation is that aloha is aloha. In Hawaiian, when we're learning the language, we dissect the word. And so aloha has many different, Algebraically, it has many different subwords. Alo, face, ha, breath. Not any kind of breath, only the breath that comes through your nose. Loha, droopy, humble. Oha, the thing that makes sure that the family stays stable. And so when you see Hawaiians greet each other, we touch our noses. We inhale the presence of the other person so that no matter how far apart we are, we're connected for eternity. That's the key to peace, that we acknowledge each other. We're not supposed to get along here. We're not supposed to. Filipino in Waipahu, Filipino in Kalihi, Samoans in KPT, yeah, still KPT, yeah? We're not supposed to get along. It's not the way the world works, and yet we found that way. We figured this out. This is our gift to the world. Every day we negotiate getting along with each other. We negotiate it. Passively, actively, we figure it out. This is what we have to offer the world. That is heritage. I'm going to sing the final song. It's my favorite Beamer song. Helen Deshay Beamer wrote this for her friend. It's a mele called Hula. And the power of the Beamer songs is that there's really nothing below or nothing deeper than what you hear. This was Helen Deshay Beamer's way. You see it and you write it. And so her songs are like movies playing through her mind, and you're with her in the moment that she's writing these songs. I tried to get my wife to come and dance this morning, but somebody had to take the boys to school and do all the Halloween treats this morning. So if anybody knows this hula, I would be so honored if you miss Aloha Hula yourself all around the room. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for allowing Mike and I to share with all of you. Aia I ka uka o pihonua ke ki hapai pua ulu mahie hie mahalo pekelo I laila aula I ke I kanani o na pua ala he nui vale aia aia I ka uka o pihonua ke ki hapai pua ulu mahie hie I laila aula I ke I kanani o na pua ala he nui vale hohihi na manu o ke kuahivi na iwi makapolena I ka ono I ka vai o na pua o moani ke ala I ka ulu vehi vehi mahalo Mahalo ya oe e ka hoaloha I ka hoʻokipa e na malihini e ia koulei poina makani lei ona haina haina ia mai ana ka puana moani ke ala I ka ulu vehi vehi he ako o mai oe ki mo kauka iu iu hei noa haina hou haina hou mai ana ka puana moa ni ke ala I ka ulu vehi vehi he aku mako o mai oe ki mo ka uka iu iu hei noa ki mo ka uka iu iu
Mahalo nui to Aaron Sala and Michael McCartney. What a wonderful way to begin to talk about heritage and hospitality in Hawaii. Thank you both. It is our privilege to have all of you here with us today. We're so excited about the full sessions, obviously a wonderful beginning to the day, and really all of the conversations that will take place during today's meetings. I'd like to recognize some special guests we have. We already mentioned State Senator Gil Kahele, who represents Hilo, Puna, and the Ka'u districts on Hawaii Island. He serves as the chairperson of the Senate's Tourism Committee. Senator. Also, State Representative Mark Nakashima, who represents the Hamakua, North Hilo, and South Hilo district, and he chairs the House Committee on Labor and Public Employment. Rep, are you? State Representative Cindy Evans, who represents North Kona and South Kohala on Hawaii Island, and she serves as chair of the House Committee on Water and Land. She was a founding member of the Heritage Caucus and one of the early promoters of today's conference, as you heard from Mike. Cindy. Throughout the day, we're also expecting some staff members from the Office of United States Senator Brian Schatz and United States Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, so watch for Dale Hahn and Rachel James throughout the day as well. I'm not sure if they're here yet or not. Wanted to let you know that today's forum is being filmed by Olelo Community Television, so they will be filming the key sessions, and we'll be rebroadcasting those and doing them online as well, starting Thanksgiving Day. So there's an insert in your programs that lets you know that early schedule, and we'll also be posting the full schedule when it's available. So thank you, Olelo. We are trying to be more social in our media use, so as you've been taking photos of our wonderful hula and wonderful opening speakers and throughout the day, you can share those with everyone at hashtag HHHF 2014. So 3 H's and an F, 2014. This idea of the Heritage and Hospitality Forum grew out of several discussions. Mike mentioned some of them in his introduction, but the state legislature's Heritage Caucus and Historic Hawaii Foundation had co-sponsored a Historic Preservation Awareness Day at the state capitol for about 10 years. And a few years ago, we were talking about that, evaluating it, saying, you know, did this work? What could be better? How can we improve? And what we realized was the real benefit of that event was the opportunity for our heritage sites and advocacy groups and educational groups and people working in preservation to interact and learn from each other, to have that interaction and that coalition. It was also incredibly valuable for talking to our elected officials and talking about the value of Hawaii's heritage, historic places, and culture. But we felt there was a missing part of the conversation. There's an important partner, and that was the private sector. In particular, we felt that the economic value of historic preservation was being missed in that discussion. So those conversations grew. They became more focused on opportunities and barriers, strengths and threats that come with sharing our history and culture with visitors. Because we know that Hawaii's historic places have intrinsic value for the education, enjoyment, and inspiration of our residents. And we also know that the vast majority of leisure travelers choose destinations where they can experience authentic places of historic and cultural value. So the concept for today's forum is to put those two ideas together. We want the stewards of Hawaii's historic places to be able to preserve and protect, but also to be equipped to share the stories and experiences with others. And we want those in the hospitality industry to be guides and connectors for our visitors, but also have a role in protecting the very resources that they are sharing. So the Forum Planning Committee has been meeting and working since March to develop the approach and the content for today's conference. They've been tireless in their belief in the power of historic places and finding ways to share the stories and excitement with others. So that group has donated hundreds of hours to put together this inaugural event. So please join me in thanking them: Carolyn Anderson, Megan Borthwick, Kainoa Danes, Frank Haas, Kanani Kavika, Brian Links, Andrew Lockwood, Karen Lockwood, Nancy Maeda, Daniel Naho'opi'i, Andrea Nandaskar, Kaylee Wilson. Mahalo, all of you. And Tom Woods as well. We're also very thankful for our additional supporters who came together to organize and support and present the forum. So we want to thank our sponsors. Our visiting speakers had travel and hotel support from Hawaiian Airlines and Hilton Hawaiian Village. Our breakfast and mid-morning refreshments are sponsored by Pacific Islands Institute and Roberts Hawaii. Anthology provided our graphic design for the program materials, and Hone Blue is our printing sponsor. The Hawaii Convention Center has been wonderful to work with in hosting all of our venue and equipment support, and the food is absolutely wonderful. I think you'll really enjoy it. Olelo Community Media, of course, is making it available to a larger audience. Scholarships for additional attendees were made possible by Bishop Museum and New Otani Kaimana Beach Hotel. And we've received additional support from Alaska Airlines, the Fairmont Keolani, and Hyatt Waikiki Hotels. And of course, our major funding sponsor is the Hawaii Tourism Authority. Mahalo all. We've had a few modifications to the program. Our planned keynote speaker, Andrew Tewahete, has been stuck in the United Kingdom. He was having a hard time getting back here from Manchester, and so he's not able to make it to be our luncheon speaker today. Instead, our keynote address this afternoon will be given by Andrew Witt. Mr. Witt was originally to be our morning speaker, but he's graciously agreed to speak later today. But I'm extremely pleased to have our morning plenary talk offered by Ramsay Taum. Mr. Taum is the founder and president of the Life Enhancement Institute of the Pacific, which is a consulting firm dedicated to protecting, preserving, and caring for the social, cultural, and historic environment that makes Hawaii a unique place to live, work, and visit. Ramsay has worked in business, government, and community service. His work promotes sustainable, place-based, and Hawaiian cultural stewardship principles and practices. He is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and the University of Southern California. He has been mentored and trained by respected Hawaiian kupuna as a practitioner and instructor of several Native Hawaiian practices, including ho'oponopono, lomihaha, and lua. He has a distinguished history of community engagement, including board service with Kualoa Ranch, Pacifica Foundation Hawaii, Hawaii Maoli, Pacific Islanders in Communication, and Historic Hawaii Foundation. Please welcome Ramsay Taum.
Mahalo, Kiersten. Aloha mai kako, aloha. Mahalo, mahalo, mahalo. E holoko no ke kino a me kauhane. He maalama pono, ka manao, Keola, ke kino, I kamanawa apau loa. In those words, we say unify mind, body, and spirit. Not do it when we're here together now, but as I think Aaron and Mike alluded to, through all time, when we leave here, that we stay connected. Mahalo to Frank Haas for calling me the other day and inviting me to participate and to share in this gathering, which has been, I guess, some time coming. Aloha, Representative Evans, good to see you. I remember the days we were talking about something like this and hoping that would come. So congratulations and thank you to HTA. Though the original presentation was going to be about what is heritage tourism and who is the heritage tourist, I think you're going to hear about that at lunch. But what I'd like to do is be able to actually show you who they are. In 2006, the Pacifica Foundation and Life Enhancement Institute came together to ask a question or answer a question. Because as many of you know, there was a strategic plan. I'm going to talk about that here shortly, that HTA put out. And we were already having these questions about how do we represent communities. Because in looking through the program, and I think our experience over the years is that somehow, somewhere, the host community seems to get lost in the conversation of heritage as much as we say heritage is about people. And we know very much that in our own communities, when we talk about people, we're talking about places, because in Hawaiian culture, we really can't separate the people from the place. And so Pacifica Foundation got together and said, well, how can we actually begin to engage community at a different level? And so the product basically became this. It was the idea of how do we get the host community to actually engage with the visitor in a different way rather than waiting for the visitor to be dropped in on them. And we asked different questions. So for those of you who are interested, I'm putting it right up front. This is an operating page now. It was a product of our effort to create what is called the Kavelina Network. And for those of you that want to go to it or want to, there's the website, and you can go there. It is active. And so my comments this morning is really to talk about this community-based host-visitor experience that is really focused on how the host community begins to maintain, share everything we were going to talk about heritage, their cultural heritage, their places, their stories, their aloha. How do they do that in a way that is, I guess, experienced differently over time? And so we gathered a group of elders in Kupuna from across the Pacific, and we asked them to come in and said, what are you doing in your communities to share your culture, to maintain your places, etc.? So from Samoa, Aotearoa, here in Hawaii, we came and we talked and said, what are the ingredients? What are those things? And they started talking about the communities. Well, as a result of that conversation, we decided it was important for us to go and identify those communities. Well, 5 years later, 6 years later, these are the 10 communities that actually stepped up and decided that they wanted to participate and become part of this network. These are the people and their places. And the intention was really to say that we have things that we want to share with others. And the difference between being invaded and being welcomed because we invite you became these two pillars. And the community got together over a series of meetings and decided that there were certain things that were important. And so this is what they had to say, and you'll find this on the webpage. One, what we want to do is create a real experience, and Aaron said it earlier, how do you define authentic? But being real. Real, authentic cultural experiences that we, as the native people of this place, our communities, can demonstrate our stewardship and our care and our kinship to the lands that identify us, our culture and our values. But to do this in a way that invites visitors to engage with us in ways that are important to us and not just to them. And more importantly, as we do this, to honor and maintain, as well as to demonstrate, the protocols and the practices that are guided by our principles and our values in a way that is still relevant, not just to the host, but also to the visitor who's interested in learning about our places. And so these communities wanted to be more active in the engagement piece, the inviting piece. They didn't want to be the victims in some cases, where buses were coming through and people were coming in doing things on their schedules rather than the schedule of community, the natural time versus the artificial time. And so in these conversations, these are some of the points that came up. And so I'm putting their words up. They're saying, ours is not a staged experience. what we're providing is opportunity to see or take part in activities that we normally do. And what I want to stop here and say is, up to this point, the experience that these communities were having was that someone says, I'd like to have a cultural experience. Can I come at 10 o'clock? All right, so the taro farmer is saying, okay, I have to leave what I'm doing in the lo'i and come over here at 10 o'clock so you can have a cultural experience. And if culture is alive, it's not that I'm going to leave my culture, my life, and go back to do culture, or leave culture and go do my life. They are combined. So we said, well, how do we make this happen? So the switch happened. Tell you what, I'm going to be in the lo'i at 7 o'clock. You come then and you have a cultural experience. I'm going to pull taro. So all of a sudden, what was happening is that the cultural experience was much more authentic because it wasn't a stage thing. It wasn't something we're doing outside of our lives. More importantly, however, these communities says, we're farmers first. We don't want to become a tourism agency, but we want to share. And so there are certain times and places that we want to invite you. You come here, but you don't go there. Okay? We share this, but that's our home. And similarly, well, I think we've all talked about it over time, the experience that wherever you go in the world, there seems to be this love-hate relationship between the community and tourists that travel through and run through and off they go. This community said, we don't want that. What we'd like to do is welcome strangers and hopefully bid farewell to friends and family and shift that relationship. And so this involved the idea that let's restore our ancient sites with those who want to see them. How do we begin to share our cultural practices in a way that's meaningful to us as well as meaningful to them? So bottom line, I think this is kind of the things we talk about in terms of heritage. And so in 2006, as I said, we picked up on what was then the strategic plan and tried to align this conceptual plan for Kabilina Network with the strategic plan that the HTA put together. And as we started talking about it, we recognized it was all there because for those of you that aren't familiar, there's a critical piece in there that says this. By 2015, which is like right around the corner, these are the things that we hope to achieve, right? Honor Hawaii's people and heritage, value or perpetuate natural and cultural resources, et cetera, et cetera. Well, interesting enough, each and every one of these things became a pillar of the strategic approach that we use in developing this community-based host visitor experience. But in this case, it started with the community. We had a 4-phase project, and thanks to HTA, who actually funded the first phase, we were able to leverage that and get A&A money over a period of 4 or 5 years. And so we were able to sustain some kind of growth and development with the communities that looked at long-term as well as short-term benefits. It also created a model as well as a curriculum so that any other community that wanted to learn how to do this could then do that. But there are some critical principles and concepts that are in each of those, each of that strategic approach. Now, in the 4-phase effort, these are the phases just loosely, but the most critical one was the first phase. We needed to reframe, redefine, and refocus our energies and attentions because we found that in the conversation, we were being driven by definitions, concepts, and expectations that weren't from the place. We were already operating inside a paradigm that was defined by somebody else and not us. Even the concept of how do we invite people, we kept getting caught in the terminology of marketing. How do we market it? How do we market? I don't know about you, but when we have baby luau's, we don't market the baby luau. We invite people to come. And so we had to get really down into the mud, if you would, the lepo, and ask the community, how do you invite people to your home and your community as a host? And so it introduced an interesting conversation because we began to acknowledge that a lot of the things that we were doing in response to the request and interest to come into our communities was really being driven by a continental worldview of visitor experiences and tourism. So we reframed it. It says, well, how then do we as a community, let's look at an islander worldview. And that began to shift the conversation. It helped us to acknowledge that wherever we go, there's culture, there's stories, there's history. But if we're not careful, we turn those places into no places because they begin to look like everything else. And I think you've heard me and others, especially with Native Hawaiian Hospitality Association over the years, continue to emphasize the power and the importance of acknowledging our places and the people there. And so in this sense of place, visitor experience, this is what our community acknowledged, or these communities. They acknowledged that their identity, the things that they had to share, came from their relationship from the place. Regardless of where you go in the world, our cultures are basically a reflection of our relationship to our resources. If you go to Alaska and you go to Arizona, start with the A's, I think you'll see that the cultures are reflecting different things, which is fundamentally their places. So the community says, yeah, we are our place. Hey, Hawaii, I am Hawaii. So let's start there. And then we begin to work out, what is our social construct? What is it that we have to share with people? Well, let's look at our relationship and our resources. That's who we are. That's what we have to offer. This is what we're proud of. And now, let's welcome those who are interested in sharing and learning that with us. And so this place-based approach began to shift this idea that a more sustainable idea of concept or sharing starts with our places. And so the network found 10 places, 10 communities who are willing to look at building their relationship with their guests and visitors in a very different way. Really beginning to peel apart this concept of heritage tourism, cultural tourism, all of these various words. In the community, it was just said sharing. Yeah. It's not about tourism. It's about how do we share with you. And Mike said it earlier. It wasn't just about the money, because in many cases, these communities aren't looking for money. What they're looking for is engagement. They're looking for people to come and help and work, to do things. So we had to create different models of exchange. Currencies of exchange wasn't just cash. Some of the currency was aloha. Some of the currency was hana, working. Some of the currency was just exchange of stories. And in many cases, it was about relationships that would go on for many years. So each community had to look at what was important to them, but it always came back to relationships versus transactions. At some point in time, they wanted to make sure that if you walked in as a stranger, you would leave as a friend, or perhaps an extended member of the family. That was really a critical, important piece. Equally important was the notion that you come and there is a sense of belonging. I've had the good fortune of speaking to different audiences in international as well as national communities, and this is the one thing I'm finding is consistent. There's a tendency, or at least a desire, for many people to want to belong or have a connection to what Aaron and Mike were talking about, that people of this place have to their places. They want to have that connection, and they want to have the connection with the people. And so what I'd offer is that how then do we extend ourselves and create a vision that is inclusive? And so these communities sat down and said, well, our vision is this, living pono in our sovereign land in a world that shares our aloha. And it came out of this conversation where it started a little bit differently. A world that shares our aloha, but a place where we can be ourselves, where we can be Hawaiian. And in doing that, they took kuleana, responsibility. And so it was looking at what was appropriate for us, as well as what's appropriate for the visitor. And to exhibit the experience by looking at these fundamental values of aloha, pono, kuleana, and ma'alama, caring for, exchanging, sharing, and being in balance. I just took a screenshot of some of the vision statement there, and I'm just focused on the green. You may not be able to read it all. But cultural and spiritual well-being, economic livelihood opportunities, social and family relations, environmental responsibility, political support and self-reliance, communications and technology. So these are the things that they held important to the success of their effort. And notice, this isn't about going back. This is about moving forward and bringing our culture with us and using the technology and expertise of the present, but always honoring the past in a meaningful way in the present. And so it's about looking forward while we acknowledge our past. It was also founded on these value statements. You can read them faster than I can read them to you, but I think you'll see that it comes down to community, creating community-based model, looking at benefits that have cultural as well as spiritual meaning to them. Bottom line, though, treating visitors like family, building lasting friendships, and extending the meaning of ohana. Sandwiched in between there are all these other things that I think I've already mentioned briefly. But if you want to learn more about them specifically, we will share the strategic planning document for you. The mission was even greater, to support and promote Hawaii community-based visitor experiences. Now, this is Pacifica, looking at these communities that are culturally appropriate, socially responsible, environmentally sustainable, and economically viable. So oftentimes we think that communities really don't want money, but it's not so much about money as much as it is about prosperity. How can we feed our families? How can we feed our communities? How can we feed the visitor? The success measure shifts. It was, has everyone eaten today? Yeah, this is what our kupuna taught us. My grandmother asked me, did you eat today? When I walked in the house. Not what I did. She asked me, did you eat today? Did you have enough to eat? Do you want more? Her measure of success was whether or not people were fed. So this community says, that's the same thing for us. If everyone is eating, that means we're doing something correctly. If everyone is thriving, we're doing something right. But to say that I had 50 tourists come in or visitors come through and I still don't know how cannot eat, something's wrong. There's a misalignment there. And so the alignment of these goals said we need to build capacity. We need to create job opportunities. We look at networking opportunities within our communities, but it requires us to plan better, to relate to our communities and the public, both commercial and otherwise. But then we need to develop some access point, web development, and then we need to coordinate that effort. And so over the 5 years, 6 years, these communities got in and out of this process, and they developed experiences that you can actually go and experience now, either one at a time or you can string them together like a lei. The intent that we had was to move away from what was considered a serving paradigm to a place and host-based driven process that was culturally sensitive, sensitized, and socially enriching by building relationships and kinship, as you see in the bottom statement. It was also about finding ways to assist these communities in growing self-sufficiency and not becoming codependent on particular industries or particular businesses, but finding ways to answer the question when, not if, we have to feed ourselves, what will we do? We don't have to rely on someone else. So they built this network, they created opportunities and jobs for one another, but more importantly, they developed a method to train others. And so there was a training curriculum that was built so that other communities, and we're now getting requests from Native communities on the continent to do the same. So here's what they said. We do not change what we do or how we live our lives. Instead, we share what we do and why we do it to those guests that come in. And we want to do this in the way that honors our land. We host in these very special places that are not created for the visitor, but these are our places. We're creating experiences for the visitors, but we're not recreating our places. And so in each one of these opportunities, it came back to who are we and how can we share? And unfortunately, I think we've experienced conversations where it's always about what does the visitor want or how can we serve the visitor? We talk about heritage on one side, but somewhere in the equation, the host is left out, regardless of how long we've been having this conversation. And I see many of my friends in here that we've had this conversation over multiple years. And continually, somehow, that seems to drop off. And I don't think it's intentional. It just goes to show what the prevailing model is. And so the community involvement and outreach piece was critical to this process. And I would say anyone that wants to really get into that, into developing a strong heritage program, really needs to acknowledge that if you keep the community out or come in and say we want to provide buy-in rather than get input, it may be a difficult challenge. But in this case, we went across the state before we started creating anything and asked. And we didn't go where we weren't invited. So there were individuals and communities that were looking for this. And so when we were invited, we went in and talked to them about the program. And as a result, this is what we got. And this was just for that one grant response. So we created full-time positions to support the program. We hired 14 different people, consultants over time, but we had 51 elders, and we engaged 78 different youth in these communities. Now, this was just the one snapshot. It expanded since. And we resourced and leveraged the $20,000 into maybe $500,000 from ANA over time. The partnerships were formed with individuals and other organizations, 14 of which provided input, support in many different ways. And so here's just some numbers for those that are interested in those kinds of things. So the number of weeks, we spent a number of weeks participating in this activity, actually several months and if not years. We created mentors, specialists, right across the board. So all of the things that we talked about, it wasn't just about the community. There was a business component to this. Essentially what I wanted to share this morning was that the heritage tourism and the cultural tourism that we're talking about today is viable. These communities are doing it now. What they are really looking for, however, is the coordination. How can they actually continue to engage the visitor and the stream of revenue without losing themselves? This is the one critical piece that I think the communities are challenged with. How do I continue to be a farmer? How do I continue to be a fisherman and not have to develop the back of the house or a whole system of reservations, et cetera, that takes me away from my identity? I think that's one of the greatest challenges that I think any community is going to face who really wants to get into this. So we, as those interfacing with the visitor as well as the communities, have a huge opportunity here to really begin to create that safe space between the visitor and the community that allows both to experience it in a meaningful way without damaging the places or the people that are there. Yeah, so this is where we are. So our next steps is continuing the process with the communities, but also answering the call from those on the continent now who are actually experiencing this new interest in their communities and wanting to be able to do this. So I know I'm about near my end of my time here. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me or actually Anna Curry, who is our Executive Director of PFH, for more information on the project. Mahalo and aloha.
Many thanks to Ramsay Taum. Fascinating case studies, many things that I think we can learn. I'm going to be looking at that website pretty soon. Before we break for the morning concurrent sessions, I just have a couple of housekeeping items. We are a little bit over time, so all of our sessions will be 10 minutes off of the time printed in your program. So we'll start the next one at 9:40. And let's see, we had some questions about parking. If you parked in the garage here, you can go to the cashier or pay on your way out. I believe it's $10. The exhibit hall, which is in room 313A, will be open again during the mid-morning break, and that's where our refreshments will be. And then also at the beginning of the lunchtime. It will close at 12:15 for the day. The final session of the day is going to be a conversation. It's going to be interactions and discussions. So we really hope you'll all stick around. I think that's when we'll really have a chance to talk about what we've learned and experienced and where we go from here. So please stay. We're planning on ending by 3:15, so you can beat Waikiki's Hawaii Halloween traffic. But we would really like you to stick around. And then finally, we will have a survey and evaluation form that will be emailed out afterwards, and we have incentive prizes. So those of you who return that to us in a timely manner will be entered to win some of our prizes. So that concludes our morning plenary session, and again, our breakout sessions will start at 9:40. Thank you all.